Welcome to the latest in our series of introductions to the weekday first readings. This week we are on week 10 of Ordinary Time in year 2 of the weekday cycle of readings. Over the next 3 weeks we will be reading from the first book and the second book of the Kings. Today we start midway through the first book of Kings in chapter 17. And this week's focusing on chapters 17 to 19 and looking at the figure of Elijah. Elijah is remembered as in the New Testament as the one who will precede the coming of the Messiah. In lots of ways we have lots of expectations as to who we think or expect Elijah will be. But the figure that Elijah cuts in the first book of the Kings is quite a controversial one, because in many ways Elijah is portrayed as a zealot, as someone who is what you might call these days an extremist. Because at the time, the people find no problem between believing in the Lord, the God who brought them out of the land of Egypt, and having other gods there in sanctuaries alongside the Lord. Elijah, however, says that the one Lord, the one God, is the only one who should be worshipped. None of these other idols should be allowed into the temple, into the sanctuary. So it is only these that should be allowed in. I say the temple, that's not strictly true, because actually the temple at this time when Elijah is preaching is in the southern kingdom of Judah in Jerusalem, where we would expect to find it. Whereas Elijah is in the northern kingdom of Israel. The beginning of the first book of the Kings narrates the sad division of the kingdom of Israel into two kingdoms after the death of Solomon. 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel go into the northern kingdom, which retains the title of Israel. The final two, Benjamin and Judah, stay in the southern kingdom, which is named after the largest of the two tribes, which is Judah. So we find that Elijah is in the northern kingdom under the reign of the king Ahab. And the confrontation begins because Ahab has married a Phoenician princess called Jezebel. And Jezebel has begun to import Phoenician gods into Israel's worship. The confrontation is set up because Elijah, in the early readings of the week, goes down and confronts Ahab with this problem, that actually the people are not being true to the Lord who brought them out of the land of Egypt. Ahab doesn't see a problem, and neither really do the people. But Elijah prophesies that rain will be withheld until the day when the Lord decides to send it again. And so it is. A great drought falls on Israel, so Elijah is instructed by the Lord to go eastwards. It is interesting that Elijah just appears on the scene. We don't get a core narrative for Elijah as we do for some of the later prophets, most notably Isaiah and Jeremiah. Elijah appears on the scene and confronts Ahab to begin with. After this, Elijah, in obedience to the word of the Lord spoken to him, moves eastwards to a small brook, or a wadi as it is called, where he is brought food by the ravens until the stream dries up because of the drought. At this point, Elijah is instructed to go to a Sidonian town nearby, which is really the area where Jezebel has come from. So, as one of the commentaries puts it, right into the lion's den, as it were. So Elijah goes to this town and meets a widow on her way back into town, having collected a few sticks to make a fire, and asks for a small cup of water. The woman agrees to this, and then Elijah in many ways pushes his luck and says, well, can you bring me a small cake of bread as well? Elijah is obviously both hungry and thirsty. This is the point where the woman reveals that actually she is very poor. She's collecting sticks to make one last fire in order to make a meal for herself and her son, just some small cakes, in order that this will be their last meal. because after this the jar of meal will be spent, the jug of oil will be finished, no way to make anything else, because with the drought crops aren't growing, so famine is looming. However, Elijah prophesies in obedience to the word of the Lord that these will not be spent, these will not be used up, and so it is proved to be true. The word of the Lord spoken through Elijah is proved to be true. It reflects back on the book of Deuteronomy, where Moses states that you can tell a prophet is real because the word that he speaks comes true, showing that it is in accord with the word of the Lord. As we move through the week, Elijah comes back to Israel and confronts the prophets of Baal, laying down a challenge to the prophets to show that whichever God answers by fire on sacrifices will be the God who is proved to be true. It is quite easy to see that the way that the text is written is polemical. It is clearly written from the point of view of proving that the Lord is God. Whilst we take this for granted and whilst we know this was not necessarily obvious at the time. As noted at the beginning of this short video, then the people were quite happy to accept other gods alongside the Lord. Elijah actually wants to prove beyond any doubt that there is only the one Lord, and he alone is to be worshipped. Having set up the competition, then the narrator of the book of the Kings has Elijah mocking the prophets of Baal because they dance around the altar all day, calling on the name of their gods to come and to answer, and ultimately get nowhere. Elijah even wonders if their God is asleep or has gone on a journey, perhaps even gone on holiday. Maybe they need to shout a little bit louder in order to be heard. Sometimes it can be a temptation for all of us to think that God doesn't hear us when we call. But Elijah proves that when we call on the Lord's name, he always hears us. Because when Elijah calls on the name of the Lord, he repairs the altar of the Lord, prepares the sacrifices, and then has water poured over the sacrifices and poured around them. When the Lord answers by fire, then it consumes the whole sacrifice and even laps against the water in the trench. And so it is proved to be that the Lord truly is God. After this, Elijah instructs that all the prophets of Baal are to be rounded up and to be executed. Not one of the nicer things that we see within this. But it's also one of those where we have to remember that Elijah sees this as a competition. That if the Lord is truly to be believed, then there can be no other option. It is also worth noting that the 400 prophets of Baal, we are told, are fed from the king's table. That the king and the queen support these prophets, whereas they do not appear to support Elijah. Elijah throughout is portrayed as a wandering itinerant. So it is in that context, really, that if the prophets of Baal are allowed to go on, then Elijah would see it as allowing the infection to continue. By executing the prophets of Baal, then Elijah sees it as cutting out the infected portion of the wound. We may not see it like that, but it is important to look at the text as it is presented to us, not as we would like it to be. After this, Jezebel threatens Elijah and says that she will make Elijah as dead as the prophets that she fed from her own table by the same time the next day. This always strikes me as curious that Elijah then flees for his life. Because having won the great victory and having had the Lord prove that he is God and that whenever he calls on the Lord's name, the Lord answers him, Elijah then flees to go and meet God at Horeb, the mountain of God. We don't actually hear of Elijah's journey, but Elijah sets off into the wilderness. Having won this great victory, he then becomes despondent because he just wonders what it is all being in aid of. But the angel of the Lord appears to him and has got a jug of water and some cakes ready by his head for Elijah to eat. Once Elijah has been nourished, On the strength of this food, the book tells us that he walked for 40 days and 40 nights until he reaches Horeb, the mountain of God. Clearly, the allusion there, as Elijah goes to meet the Lord on the mountain, brings us back to Israel's desert or wilderness experience as they wandered for 40 years. And then too, as Elijah meets God on the mountain, we are reminded too that Moses asked to meet the Lord, and whilst the Lord said he couldn't see his face, he still revealed his presence to him, so much so that Moses' face shone. Elijah, we are not told, does see God, but certainly God's presence is revealed to him in some way. Because we find that, unlike in the book of Exodus, when we hear of Moses meeting with the Lord, here it's not in fire or earthquakes or great natural signs, phenomena or splendour, but rather in the sound of silence. It can seem contradictory in some ways, but having seen all the great signs, then it proves also that the Lord did not just be found in the great signs, the great works, but also in the silence of our hearts as well. The Lord manifests himself to Elijah in this way. Having done so, the Lord wants to know why Elijah is actually here. What is it that Elijah has come for? Elijah talks about the lack of faith in Israel, and ultimately wants to know why the Lord hasn't done more about it. The Lord doesn't actually directly answer Elijah's question, but rather sent him back to anoint Elisha as his successor and Jehu as the new king of Israel. Jehu, as we will see later on in the following of these videos, will be a king who is dedicated to the worship of the Lord. However, that at the moment is another story. Elijah's story continues in this way with the anointing of Elisha once he gets back. But as we see quite often, then Elisha wants to go and bid his parents goodbye. He wants to finish things off first and draw a neat conclusion. Elijah is almost sarcastic or sardonic, certainly in his response, because Elijah just sort of says, well, what have I done to you? What concern are you to me? Having just thrown his mantle over him, or thrown his cloak over him, symbolically passing on his mantle to Elisha. And so, certainly Elisha determinedly and decisively leaves his work, even though he's portrayed as a rich farmer. Whether Elisha actually says goodbye to his parents is not told to us in the story. But certainly there is quite a definitive, decisive and quick break with his past life, as Elisha leaves everything behind in order to follow Elijah. As we draw to the close of this week, it perhaps causes us to consider two questions. Do we always know that the Lord is with us when we call on his name? Or do we sometimes feel, like Elijah did, even though he knew the Lord was there with him, that he has perhaps abandoned us? Or as he mocked the prophets of Baal, that God is not there when we want him, that he's gone on a journey or is asleep? Do we recognize his presence in our lives? And secondly, to consider in ourselves, what cost is it that the Lord asks of us in order that we should follow him?